All right, back for part two of our progressivism notes, and this is one of my most exciting times of the semester where I get to teach about our man Teddy Roosevelt right there. We've talked about him a little bit with imperialism, just a little bit with part one. But we're going to really dive in depth with Teddy Roosevelt here. He's one of those guys. If we could spend a week of class on Teddy Roosevelt, we would. Interesting. We're going to break up this next part of progressivism into our three progressive presidents. So we're going to tackle Teddy Roosevelt's administration. Then we're going to talk about Taft, another Republican, and then we'll get to Woodrow Wilson and his what was called New Freedom. So Teddy Roosevelt, we've hit on this a little bit, was born to a very wealthy New York family. He was actually able to see Lincoln's casket come by his grandfather's New York City home as at Lincoln's funeral procession went through the country back to Illinois. Um, Got a lot of the inside stories about Teddy Roosevelt we could tell you about how he actually basically locked his future wife in a closet when they were both small children so that she didn't get to see Lincoln's funeral procession. Weird story. He was very sickly as a boy. His dad always encouraged him to work himself up, do things that were physically vigorous. When he was at Harvard, he was a boxer and a wrestler. I think we've mentioned that. Teddy Roosevelt had about the worst day anybody could imagine on February 14th, 1884, when he was serving as a state assemblyman in New York and Albany. He got a letter that he needed to rush home because his wife and mother were both ill. And on the same day, both of them passed away. His wife died of a kidney disease related to the pregnancy. Mother died of typhoid fever. And he did have a young daughter here. Now, his father was his hero. His father, he thought, was the greatest man who ever lived. I think I told y'all in class that the one thing he was ashamed of his father for was hiring a substitute for the Civil War. His father had died several years before this, and he just feels like he's alone in the world. Now, there's obviously a lot of Roosevelt legacy. He was a distant cousin of future President Franklin Roosevelt. Future President Franklin Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor, was Teddy Roosevelt's niece. But he passes off his baby daughter to his sister and his sister Corinne, and then he heads off to the Badlands, and he lives as a rancher for a while in South Dakota. He just kind of gives up on life back east. Now, he's got about every bit of government experience you could. This cartoon does a good job of it. He was a Badlands rancher, so there's where the cowboy comes in. He was a historian, wrote a number of books. He was the president of the New York City Police Commission, assistant secretary of the Navy. He was the Rough Rider during the Spanish-American War. They skip over, but he was at one point head of the Civil Service Commission, supposed to clean up government, basically implement the Pendleton Act. He was the governor of New York. Remember, he was made vice president because they wanted to basically kick him upstairs. The New York City bosses didn't like that he was standing in their way. He becomes president, of course, when McKinley gets shot. He's going to get the Nobel Peace Prize we've talked about for making peace between Russia and Japan at the Russo-Japanese War and Treaty of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And then after his presidency, he's going to go on to become a big game hunter in Africa. Actually explored tributaries of the Amazon River for National Geographic. So he's a Renaissance man. Well, it's kind of impressive that Teddy Roosevelt himself ends up on Mount Rushmore, since this was sculpted, less than 2 decades after he passed away. So he launched to national prominence pretty quickly in hero status. He had a big family. So his first wife, I said, passed away. So his daughter, Baby Lee is what he called her. His first wife's maiden name was Lee, is from that first marriage. Now, Teddy Roosevelt met his first wife when he was in college at Harvard. She was a wealthy Bostonian girl. And he had dated his second wife, Edith, growing up. So it's actually weird that his first wife, Edith, was a guest at said that wrong. His second wife, Edith, was a guest at his wedding to his first wife, Alice Hathaway Lee. Interesting, right? So his first wife passes away. When he comes back from the Badlands, he strikes up a relationship again with Edith, and they have a number of children you can see there. And his oldest daughter was from his first marriage. She was somebody who liked to party. She was not afraid to be seen with many different men in public, smoke and drink in public. And at one point, his advisors came to him and said, "You have to contain your daughter. You have to make sure she's not a national embarrassment." And he told them this: I can either run the country or I can control or attend to Alice. I can't do both. He said it's hard to raise a teenage daughter. Sure, some of your parents would agree. All right, so he becomes president when McKinley gets shot. And Teddy Roosevelt is going to promise the American people this, that they're going to get a square deal. That's a term you need to recognize with him. Put that in your notes. It basically means everybody's going to get a fair shake. He's one of these progressive era folks who thinks that the government's got to take an active role in managing people's lives. Now, he's a trust buster. He actually doesn't break up as many trusts as Taft, but he gets the nickname the trust buster in history. He's going to bring suit against J.P. Morgan and Northern Securities Company. Now, Grant, this is something that took a while for the Justice Department to work it through the courts, but he is not afraid to go after big businessmen. We're going to look at Roosevelt's leadership through the prism of the coal strike that happened the year after he took office. So the anthracite coal strike is going to be something that could potentially cripple America because America ran on coal. So in May of 1902, you can see here that we've got 147,000 miners walked off the job. So I really want you to think about what is this going to show us about how Teddy Roosevelt is going to view the president's role in America. So first off, we talked about Samuel Gompers. Remember, he was the head of the American Federation of Labor. He says this is the most important event in the history of the labor movement in the United States. So big, sweeping changes are coming. The two sides of this strike are the miners are represented by John Mitchell, head of the United Mine Workers, and the mine owners are represented by an industrialist named George Baer, who J.P. Morgan had installed as president of the Reading Railroad, who's basically representing the coal mine owners. So these are the two. Well, to show you the love that the coal miners had for John Mitchell, president of the Coal Miners Union, when President McKinley was shot, news starts to spread throughout the country, and these coal miners who have been down the mines all day, as they come up from the mine, they're hearing that the president's been shot, and they're freaking out. These grown men are weeping, crying on each other's shoulder. Say, "Oh my gosh, the president's been shot!" And then somebody says, "Yes, President McKinley's been shot." They're like, "Oh, McKinley? Woo!" Because these guys were thinking Mitchell was shot. He was their hero. All right, there's two ways that we can look at dealing with executive decisions in a time of crisis. The James Buchanan way or the Abraham Lincoln way. And we're going to see Teddy Roosevelt actually use this as his kind of guiding point. So James Buchanan, we know, became president in 1856. My apologies. Democrat who, when the country kind of crumbled with the Civil War and when the South seceded after the election of 1860, he did this. He sat there and looked confused. Didn't really do anything. He said, "What should I do?" He threw up his hands. He said, "The South can't secede, but I can't do anything about it." And remember, he's one of these northern politicians that gives in to Southerners some that we're going to call a doughface. Now, Lincoln, obviously, with the Civil War crisis, he ticked a lot of people off. Remember, he suspended habeas corpus. A lot of people called him a dictator. And Lincoln said, "Oh, well, I'm going to do what I have to do to keep the country together." So we're going to see Teddy Roosevelt is going to gravitate more towards the Lincoln view. All right, Roosevelt, to begin with, gets all the facts together. He has his Commissioner of Labor, so it's a cabinet-level position, brilliant statistician named Carroll Wright, prepare a report basically saying what are the arguments of both sides. Like, should the miners get a raise? Should they not? And Roosevelt was very determined not to sound like he was favoring one side or the other. So he demands this not be released to the public. It's just his own fact-finding commission. So he actually thought it sounded too sympathetic to the miners. So at first, that's why he demands nobody sees it. Now, this does eventually get released to the public. Now, there were some episodes of violence in this strike. One of the main ones was at Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. And, Roosevelt did not want to deal with any kind of violence. He definitely wanted to get the coal mines working again, get the country's economy rolling, because, you get close to winter and coal miners are on strike, you're going to have buildings that aren't going to be heated. You're going to have people that could potentially freeze to death. Not to mention all the trains aren't going to be able to travel. Coal-fueled ships aren't going to be able to go out on the sea. And J.P. Morgan contacted Roosevelt, because J.P. Morgan is in league with the mine owners here, said, "If we have done anything wrong, send your man to my man and they can fix it up." This really ticked Teddy Roosevelt off, because he's thinking, wait a minute. We're not equals. You're not going to talk to me like I'm your business rival or business partner even. I'm the president. So this really infuriated Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Teddy Roosevelt during this time was also almost killed in a carriage accident. His carriage was actually hit by a locomotive, and his favorite Secret Service agent actually died in this. Now, the conductor, the driver of the locomotive, Roosevelt actually had to be held back from going after him because Roosevelt was so ticked off about this. But anyway, Roosevelt has to convalesce in the White House bedroom for a while, so he's got a lot of time to think and a lot of time to write. Now, look at what Roosevelt says he's going to do. He says, I had as yet no legal or constitutional duty, and therefore no legal or constitutional right in the matter. He is admitting right here, the Constitution doesn't say I can get involved. It says, I knew I might fail, but I made up my mind that if I did fail, it should at least be because of adopting, it should at least not be because of adopting the Buchanan-like attitude of fearing to try anything. So he's laying it out right there. I am not James Buchanan. I am Teddy Roosevelt. He's saying that, hey, we might not win it, but we're going to at least go down swinging. So Teddy Roosevelt decides that as commander-in-chief, he is going to use the U.S. Army to dispossess the operators of the mines. Basically, the Army is going to invade the mines and take them over. And the Army is going to operate the mines. That way the public can get the coal that they need. He did not know how this was going to work. That was a logistical nightmare that he's hoping he's not going to have to get to. But this is going to scare some people into getting to the table to try to end this strike, because then the miners would lose their jobs and the bosses would lose their mines and everybody's losing the profit. Now, we're going to eventually see Ronald Reagan in the 1980s is going to take this similar step when it came to air traffic controllers going on strike. So you got to remember, we can always trace a lot of things that happen in history back to earlier precedents. All right, this is what Roosevelt told his general, John Schofield, who was going to be in charge of this. He said the generals will not pay heed to any authority, judicial or otherwise, except to him as commander-in-chief. Basically, he said, if a judge tells you to leave the mines, tell that judge to shut up. You're going to do what the president tells you to do. He says if the operators went to the court and had a writ served on him, General Schofield would do as was done under Lincoln and simply send the writ to the president. So just like when Chief Justice Taney told Lincoln that he could not suspend the writ of habeas corpus, and Lincoln did anyway, Roosevelt says that's what he's going to do if it comes down to taking over the mines. Now, there was a Pennsylvania senator who sent this letter to President Roosevelt. He basically, actually, I got a quote from Roosevelt here, but he basically told President Roosevelt, if you do this, I will start impeachment proceedings. We're going to get you out of there. Here's Roosevelt's response. I take responsibility. It's nice to hear a politician say that, right? I take responsibility. Anyway, he says that Senator Quay could feel pretty welcome to institute impeachment proceedings if the ensuing action sufficiently vexed him. He said, I'm doing what I got to do. Go for it. You want to impeach me? Get it going. So the solution to this is they appointed a 5-member expert commission that's going to try to arbitrate the anthracite coal strike. Remember, this means that if both sides consent to arbitration, that's the term we talked about with the labor movement, it means that we say, all right, I'm going to go by whatever this third party says. So on this, you had a military officer, all right, representing the federal government. You've got an expert mining engineer. That's going to be somebody that's going to be kind of tied in with the mine owners. A Pennsylvania judge, a businessman who's familiar with both mining and coal, and then an eminent sociologist, like a university professor who basically knows the way society works and knows that the way the economy works. So the mine owners really didn't want to have anybody representing the little people, the mine workers. Roosevelt was very smart. He snuck this guy on there because he told the mine owners, hey, look, I need a university sociologist. They say, okay, we can deal with that as long as I'm not listening to a miner. They didn't know that the eminent sociologist had been a mine worker earlier in life. So TR was pretty crafty there. Anyway, this commission gets the thing settled. And look what the London Times says. We are witnessing not merely the end of the coal strike, but the entry of a powerful government upon a novel sphere of operation. This is progressivism. This is the government getting involved in Americans' lives to provide, like Teddy Roosevelt said, a square deal. Another thing he said he was going to bring was his program was called the New Nationalism. I'm going to abbreviate that there, so keep that in mind. All right, so summing it up again, this is going to lead to the Department of Commerce and Labor being created, but these cartoons all kind of tie into this. Uncle Sam saying that we got to have that coal. Teddy's the guy to get the job done. And, you know, like I said, he did not want to look like he was on one side or the other. He just wanted to hear the views of both sides. And before we dive into the rest of Teddy Roosevelt, we're going to stop this video right here. And I just want you to really see up close through the anthracite coal strike Teddy Roosevelt's style of leadership.